Well, thank you so much. I am so excited to be here. Uh, I want to share a story with you. And it happened this summer to me. I was in excruciating pain. I I couldn't even wear pants. That's how much it hurt to lift my leg. And I was on a call with my personal trainer, and she said, Emily, you have got to log your macros, your calories, and the food that I'm eating. You've got to log that. The data is so important. It helps us understand what we need to do to make adjustments and for you to hit your goals. I looked a mess. I was near tears because I was in so much pain. And I told her, I can hardly walk. It hurts. I can't put pants on. I all I think about is my pain and how I can make it feel better or how I can do everyday tasks without trying to hurt myself even more. I work in data. I get it. I love data just as much as the next person, but logging my food is not a priority for me at this point. Now, I just had what it turned out to be was a cyst on a joint, which caused sciatic pain, but I also have fibromyalgia. So my pain sensors are a little out of whack. So that made it feel even worse. And I share that with you because I share the story because one, I want you to know who's on the other side of this screen beyond the bio that you heard. And because if you haven't experienced anything like this or have a friend, colleague, or loved one that's experienced something like that, hopefully it gives you some insight into a day in the life of, because anything that could have made my life easier in that moment, I was going to take. I didn't care what it was. And so as we walk through today's talk, I really would love for you to find your story in what I'm saying. So you may not do dashboards, but you may do reports. So apply what I'm saying to that. Maybe you haven't had a customer, client, end user who has come to you and says, I have fibromyalgia or I have this. I just want you to listen, learn, and really take in and see what can apply to you. So now that we've got that introduction out of the way, by the way, I'm feeling much better. Uh, so I'm here to talk about designing accessible dashboards. So some points that we'll cover today. One is what's required, accessible and inaccessible examples. I'll kind of talk through some examples of that. A 6-step design process that I use when creating dashboards or reports, some practical tips, a workflow for you, a sample workflow in case you need that, and accessible sharing. And I've also got resources that you'll have when you have the slide deck. So let's get into it. So first off, I want to level set on a couple of things. One, I call this slide comply and conform because there are some legal requirements based on where you are in the world and what sector you work in and how public facing you are. And so we have this is not an exhaustive list, but really meant to be an example of some of the areas that require compliance. And then some guidelines like WCAG is what people may call it, or WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, that are guidelines, general guidelines for accessible content on the web that we should conform to. Now, I'm not going to do a deep dive into the specific requirements because that could take up all of my time. However, I do want to just call out a couple of things. One is that I think it was back in 2017 or so, Section 508, which really applies to federal government, public sector, I think it's if you've received money from the federal government, or if you're a contractor working on government work, you need to ensure compliance with Section 508. So that's a legal requirement. And Section 508, before 2017, had its own list of requirements. After 2017 or so, they aligned with the AA standard of WCAG. So there are three types, or there are three levels to WCAG compliance or conformance. One is single A. That's like the must-dos. That's the minimum that is expected. AA is generally what a lot of companies will go for. It's reasonable to get to this level. And then AAA, the way that I think about it is AAA is those that go above and beyond. They want to be as inclusive as possible. And getting some AAA content can be very hard for organizations depending on the size, complexity, and infrastructure. So when you look through some of these guidelines and you see single, double, and AAA, if you go with the AA standards, that will be a good guidance for you, good guideline. All right. So now that I've kind of talked through a little bit about compliance and conformance, I want to share a couple of inaccessible examples. Now, when I was putting this slide together for inaccessible examples, I was like, I don't want to pick up something from the web that somebody might take issue with because I think it's inaccessible. So I looked to myself. Before I included accessibility as part of my own process, I just developed as I thought was, I developed as I saw fit, depending on what my objective was. So I built this, what was supposed to be kind of like an infographic, and it was about funding disinformation. I wanted it to have cool colors. I wanted that light blue to kind of pop on the black background or dark charcoal background. I wanted people to get some insights. And so that's what I really wanted. It was really for me, but I put it out there on Tableau Public. That's a tool that I use to develop content like this. But it went through a very comprehensive accessibility review. I'll talk about that a little bit later. So here are some things that went wrong. There is insufficient contrast. It is very hard if you if you can see the dark blue against the dark charcoal background. Oh, that is not high contrast. That's hard to read. I relied solely on color, and that is a big mistake because when people use assistive technologies like screen readers can't read color. So without having a legend or double encoding something, meaning I'm using color and something like a diamond or different shapes. Without doing that, I've made it harder for people to read this. The keyboard navigation was a mess. I didn't even think about it. So the way the keyboard navigation went, it was in the order in which I placed it on the dashboard. So I didn't realize that, and I just put it on there. And what happened was that it was actually going from top to bottom to middle to bottom to top. It was a nightmare. And the titles were actually missing, the tagged titles. So what I did, because when I developed this, I wanted it to be aesthetically pleasing. I didn't want to have any gaps of white in this dark charcoal. Instead of having a title, I hid the title and I just increased the font size to make it look like a title. Now, we'll get into this in a little, but there's no convention there. There's no tagging that says this is a title. So I'm going to tell you what I'm going to show you or what you're about to read or consume. And so I did a disservice to my audience. So that's one example. Oh, uh, when you get the slides, by the way, you will be able to go through these, some of these examples. All right, another example. And I have to shake my head when I see this now, because I look at it now and go, oh my gosh, I've made so many mistakes. So what's wrong here? Insufficient contrast. Even though I just use readers, otherwise I have pretty good vision and I can hardly read this. I relied solely on color again. There were indistinguishable elements, meaning I didn't have borders around different elements in the graphs, like that area chart, to differentiate between the two. And just generally, it's hard to read. This is so inaccessible. The one part of me is shamed because I'm showing it to all of you, but this was before I started incorporating accessibility into my practice. So let's see some other examples of some more accessible content. So I have this dashboard here, looks pretty normal. I included it because this is something that one might see in the everyday business world. So what are some things that are wrong or could be improved? Well, the KPIs are very small relative to what KPIs should be. They should be large, drawing your attention to them. There are indistinguishable elements, again, with this area chart. And there are no instructions on how to use this visualization, if it's interactive, if I need to click somewhere. And there's no status message that if it is interactive that says, this is what you're seeing on the screen, or this is what's on the screen. So that's our first example. Now, our second example, I actually started to include accessibility into my practice. So this is what it looks like after. So what's good? The font size is large. So I can really, my attention is very much focused on those KPIs for profit, sales, and profit ratio. The status message appears at the top of the dashboard, and a cut alert legend is present. What could be better? Well, looking at this again, it looks kind of cluttered. And I think part of it's because of the data. So if I were to go back and revise this again, I might want to do something a little bit different. So that way I'm preserving the data, but I'm giving the data space to breathe, because it makes people, it helps people comprehend what I'm showing them. All right, here's another example: profit analysis for marketing. What's good about it? Well, there's a title. I love, and I always recommend in my trainings and when I'm helping people, tell them what you're going to show them, or tell them what's going to be consumed. Legends, so I have a profit legend here, even though I have a dark red, a white, and a gray. The white has a border around it, so it's distinguishable against the background. And because of the data, the way the data is, there's no white bars, though I could solve for that by putting borders around it. There's room to read. This is not cluttered at all. I can look at it and I understand what's going on. And there's sufficient contrast. So what could be better? Well, there could be a status message telling them what's being shown. I could also bold the title to visually indicate a hierarchy, because I don't know about you, but my eye is drawn to profitability over time, as opposed to the title of the dashboard, which is profit analysis for marketing. All right, another one that's not so businessy. This is a visualization I did because I live in the DC area and I was tired of the commentators talking about all of Sam Howell's sacks in the NFL. So what's good? Sam Sachs is an image because I had a specific design in mind, but I alt texted it, provided alternative text so that a screen reader could read it. Sam How is a decorative image. Therefore, the person did not need to be alt texted, even though I did. And I described him as a white quarterback with brown hair that sticks up with a light beard, wearing a burgundy jersey, so people could get a sense of what Sam was like. What could be better? Well, the gold data elements are maybe a little hard to distinguish. But who's the audience for this? Well, mainly it's for me, but I did put it in the public space. So is it accessible? Mostly. I really wanted the commentators, whether it was on Fox or CBS, I wanted them to see this visualization and go, oh, yes, even though he had 55 sacks at the time, the second half of the season so far has been completely different than the first half. We're going to stop saying this. I wanted to affect that change, even though that was a wild hope of mine. Because I put it in the public sphere, I really should have done something more with the gold to ensure that it truly was distinguishable against the background. Okay. All right, so now that we've seen some examples, I want to walk through a 6-step design process that I use and that I recommend to others. And I come at this just so that you're aware also of how I developed these skills and knowledge. I come at it from a business perspective, having been a system administrator for a system that needed to comply with Section 508, from developing dashboards, from wanting as many people as possible to be able to comprehend what a dashboard is showing them. So having that context, the way that I recommend to develop these dashboards is to design with accessibility in mind. So number one is know and learn about your audience. Secondly, recognize exclusions. These are the areas that could prevent someone from fully participating in the ability to review, consume, comprehend the report or dashboard that you're developing. Solve for one, extend to many. This may be my favorite, and we'll get into that. Be consistent with your conventions, provide choice, and prioritize content. Those are the 6 steps. So let's delve into each one of them. Knowing and learning about your audience. This is not just a requirements gathering exercise. If you come from an IT background, you know how important requirements can be. And so some people may just say, tell me what I need to do, and I'm going to go off, do it, and deliver it to you as soon as I can. And in this case, what you really want to do, and that's okay, get that information, but understand, how are they planning to interact with the dashboard? Where are they going to be? All of this information will help you design it on the initial design. Are they going to be at their desk and they've set aside plenty of time to review this dashboard? Or are they in a board meeting with an iPad or some other tablet and need to be able to get to the numbers quickly? In addition to knowing and learning about your audience, you can also do that through feedback. Feedback is one of the, I would say underrated, but it's one of the tools that can help us the most that I think some people forget to do. And there are 3 ways that you can get feedback. You can get it together. So observe someone's interaction with your dashboard. You can do it asynchronously, give them the dashboard, and then have them share back their feedback. And then you can use an automated or less intrusive way of getting feedback. And this could look like tagging or tracking software to see where they click and how they, what they click on, where they click, how much time it takes between clicks. Not everybody has access to that type of software. So one of those other two may be feasible for you. But they're all three different ways of getting feedback so that you can learn more about your audience. When I was doing a hackathon around accessibility one time, I had a participant ask me, Emily, how do I ask if somebody needs an accessible report without getting too much in their business or potentially violating some HIPAA or something? That's a great question. So I decided to put together a list of questions that can help you know and learn about your audience without feeling like you're too intrusive. Number one, what would make it easy for you to consume this data, for you to read or review this data? What's your preference on the type of charts that you find easy to read? So somebody may answer with, oh, I love bar charts and line charts, and maybe they like pie charts. And I don't like tree maps and these spaghetti looking charts. I don't like those at all. That's really valuable information. Do you have an example of a report that you really like, or otherwise stated or asked? What are the attributes of a report or dashboard that you find really useful? And they can share with you, oh, I love something that it's really clean, has a light background. I like it when the colors all mean the same thing. Again, it's super valuable information that they're providing you. Do you like to get the dashboard and explore it? Or do you like to get the insights and move on? And that's where they could say, oh, I love exploring it. And so you design it differently for that. Or I just need the insights and I need to move on. I need this big number to focus my attention because my boss is asking me for it. You can also ask, is this going on a public site or is it going to be used by the government? You may know that part of it. Or is it just for internal use? That is information that's good to know, but it doesn't lessen the need for accessibility. Are you a mouse person or do you like to use the keyboard? Otherwise asked, how do you like to navigate through a dashboard? And this is where you can have a conversation around, oh, I use a screen read or I use keyboard navigation, or, oh, I don't use either of those. I use a screen reader to help me navigate through content. Are there any preferences you have for interacting with a dashboard? Now, this one is a really broad question, but what it allows you to do is to have that conversation. If somebody says to you, look, I'm not the expert, you're the expert, or I'm just going to rely on what you put on paper or screen. And if they don't have any preferences, that's also fine, because what you can do then is to say, you know, I understand. I'm going to take all of this information as well as understanding about the data and how it should be presented effectively, and I'm going to put something together. And then I'm going to show it to you for some feedback, and then I'll make whatever changes we need to make, and then we can get it published, or I can send you the final copy. So you're already letting them know what your process is going to be so that they have some insight into that, and you're going to get their feedback, so you will make some of those adjustments. So why is this part so important? And it's because not everybody, first of all, not everybody knows that they have an exclusion or that they have an invisible disability. A lot of people may not know they have ADHD, and they just may think, well, that's just the way I am. And so by knowing your audience, you can design for them, regardless of whether they feel safe enough to raise their hand and say, hi, it's me. I need a screen reader, or I need it to be really clean because it feels overwhelming. All right, the next step is to solve for one, extend to many. Now, I have a picture here of a sidewalk that's been curb cut. And if you are not familiar with the term, it's really where it's kind of that dip in the corner of a sidewalk. Sometimes it may have typically like a yellow bumpy section to it. It was originally meant for wheelchairs. But what's beautiful about it is that, yes, people who needed to use wheelchairs have been able to cross the street more easily. But moms or dads or whomever with strollers, kids on bikes or scooters, people with walker, like so many people can now benefit from this because of this one need that somebody voiced. So here's a few examples that I'll walk through of how you can solve for one, extend to many. The first one is to recognize the exclusions of your audience, which you'll do through learning about them. So if you have a visually impaired individual, the solve for one part may be they need big numbers that have a high color contrast so that they can see them. Maybe they have low vision. The extend to many piece may be somebody who just needs their attention called to the numbers, or somebody who needs to understand what's important. And by using that convention of big, that focuses us on what's important. Be consistent with our conventions. Consistently use titles, headers, subheaders, because it means something to screen readers and to other technologies. And that was a mistake I made in that funding disinformation visualization. Consistent color usage. Not only does this help people be able to understand and get the message of the data quicker, it's just, well, I mean, that's really what it's meant to do, is to help people understand and move on to the next thing. Because you want people to focus on the message of the data and not trying to figure out how to read it. Apply conventions. Small typically means less size, less color. So you want to stick with that because it's easier for people to understand. And then consistently apply your layout so people know what to expect to help them focus. If I know that I've got the title at the top, some filters on the left side, and then my main content, the rest of the screen, I know where I can focus my attention. Provide choice. So accessible visualizations or data experiences are ones where users can complete a task multiple ways. That includes having a mouse or using a keyboard, as two examples. There's also finding alternative ways to present the data. So make the data available. Now, the caveat here is that if it's confidential data, perhaps you roll it up to an aggregate so you can provide a data table. So of course, comply with your organization's confidentiality rules. But if you're making this data available in a bar chart, then you can make it available in a data table. But provide that because it may be more helpful for somebody to be able to go through a table and be able to understand it that way versus a bar chart, for example. And then prioritize content. Focus on the most important. When I was, I'll say, growing up in data visualization, I learned about the F or Z pattern, and in the US, this is generally how we read. And whatever your reading order is, wherever you're at, think about that reading order. If your reading order is right to left, the most important thing goes on the right. I'll use the US example here. So if my most important thing is at the top or the top left, that's where I want to put that. The least important is at the bottom or the bottom right. And so why should we do this? Because if my reader gets distracted, at least they've got the most important message. And the least important, then maybe they can come back to later whenever it's, maybe it's not time sensitive. So it's getting the most important content out there. And then use bands. Those are big aggregate numbers, kind of like what we think about for KPIs, the key performance indicators. That helps draw the attention to key metrics. So I had somebody one time say, well, Emily, aren't these just good data visualization practices? And if you have experience with data visualization, you may think the same thing. And they are. And these best practices can help make accessible visualizations. Sometimes people forget those to do those best practices, or we've gotten into a certain way of doing work and we've forgotten those, or we don't include them. Having those best practices included helps create accessible visualizations. All right, so now I have some practical tips. And I've got these categorized by exclusion. Sight. This is the first one, and I feel like this is the one that people think about the most when they think about having an accessible visualization. But this is just one of the exclusions. And just to also call this out here, you can have an exclusion for a short term, or it can be permanent. So there's, I think sometimes we think about these exclusions as permanent things. Somebody's going to be blind forever, or, and that's the one people think about the most, but it's actually, maybe they just had a procedure and the next couple of days they'll have low vision, or maybe it is just low vision is what they'll have, but it's also other things as we'll learn about. So for sight, ensure that the colors are distinguishable and have high contrast. Use a contrast checker. I have some in the resources section. So for regular text, which is 12-point font, which is 16 pixels, the ratio that you want is 4.5 to 1. For large text, it's a 3-to-1 ratio, and large text is 18-point font or 24 pixel. You would also use that ratio for non-text elements, and that's where your bar charts, your charts come into play. So whether it's a bar, area chart, stacked bar chart, that all comes into play with those non-text elements. You also want to select a readable font. Personally, I love Verdana. It's my favorite font. But it's my favorite font because I feel like it's pretty accessible. It's web safe, it has good spacing, and it minimizes or also avoids mirroring and imposter letters. Imposter letters, I think the best example of that is when a capital I looks like a lowercase l. And mirroring is if you turn them backwards. This is usually what you'll see with B's and D's or P's and Q's. If they look the same, just flipped in reverse, that can cause some challenges, especially with people with dyslexia. And then when you select a readable font, make sure the body of your text and your axes are 10-point font or greater, which is 12 pixels. And then use blank space. You may also refer to this as white space. You'll want 1 pixel as a kind of a border to distinguish the elements. And then use double encoding, such as arrows and color, because remember, color is not readable by screen readers. And so this double encoding helps people both using screen readers or non-screen readers, low vision, it helps more people. The next exclusion is dexterity. And this is where you can make your report accessible with a keyboard, so people can tab through. And if somebody has a switch that they need to use or sip and puff, you'll learn about that as you learn, you'll learn whether you need to use that or design for it based on when you learn about your audience. And The other recommendation or tip that I have is reduce the amount of clicks it takes to get to the insights. If you have dexterity problems, so one of the joys I have in life, and that's sarcastic, is I get trigger finger. And I am afraid I'm going to break my finger sometimes. So I don't want to do a lot of clicking because my finger is frozen. And so it's a temporary thing. But I want to reduce the amount of clicks I need to get to the insights. That helps busy people. It helps distracted people. It helps people who have issues with their dexterity. When it comes to comprehension, if it works for the data, use a highlight color instead of a full color palette. Again, drawing their attention, helping them understand what's the most important thing you want to point out to them. Is one thing really bad and the rest is not so bad? Well, then use perhaps a dark burgundy for the really bad thing, and maybe use a lighter gray or some shade of gray that still has some contrast to really highlight the bad versus the rest of the population. You can also, and we've talked about this a couple of times, focus on the most important metrics. Those bands, big numbers are a great way to do that. Create space. Don't have a dense dashboard. This is one thing that I've seen when I was an enablement consultant, where I would look at dashboards a lot. And sometimes developers get in their head, and they come from a good place. They just want to provide as much data as possible because you might want to know about this. And so it wasn't part of the requirements. It wasn't part of what they asked for, but it's in the data. They want to provide it to you just in case. And it can cause a very dense dashboard with lots of charts, graphs, numbers, text tables, and it becomes overwhelming. And so as a result, it's harder for people to focus and understand. So when you give people space in the dashboard, it helps them understand and focus. Additionally, if somebody's given you kind of free rein to look at the data and come up with a dashboard, you may be tempted to provide all of the different observations you have. But there's not one through line or commonality, one story. And so to help people understand what's going on, focus on one story, one question at a time. It will help with comprehension. And then finally, keep it simple, consistent, and quiet. This is helpful for a lot of people who may be neurodivergent. Quiet also can be an effective use of highlight colors instead of having like a rainbow all over a dashboard. It's focused, it's clean, a lot of space to read. It's kind of a compilation of other recommendations that you see on the slide. So I have some common challenges and ways to solve them. This will be available for you. I'll just point out a couple, but you'll be able to have this reference for you to use later. If somebody has color blindness, I think that was my first introduction into accessibility. Use contrasting colors, use double encoding. That can help. That's one way to solve it. For sound, we don't typically have that come up as much, but if people cannot hear sound reliably, don't rely on audio or captioning. Sometimes captioning can be off a little bit, and provide a visual display. When it comes to epilepsy, where people may have epileptic episodes, don't have more than 3 flashes in 1 second. I know animation is great. And so what you want to do is, if you're animating your visualizations, you want to ensure that it's pre-generated changes in 1 second. And that's a good pace for people to, one, see, understand what's going on, and it shouldn't cause epileptic episodes, excuse me. So you've heard about the design process, you've got some practical tips, but like, how do you actually implement this in real life? Here's a sample workflow. I'll just call out a few things because I have a couple of other things I want to share with you before our time runs out. Know your audience. The ones that are bulleted are the ones that I think are super important amongst the other important items. Know your audience, then develop your dashboard or report. Check for accessibility, get user feedback, iterate. That's totally fine to iterate and make changes. That's a normal part of the process. And then periodically check in with your users. Just because you think your report or dashboard is the greatest thing since sliced bread doesn't mean they do. And you need to confirm that or find out what needs to be changed, because maybe the user base has changed too.
Emily, I did just want to jump in for a time check for Q&A. We have a lively chat and Q&A session, so yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna speed through the rest of this. I've got some questions here. If you are like, where do I even begin? Reference these questions because I think they can kind of help. And then when it comes to sharing, before you share your report or dashboard out, start with those built-in accessibility checkers. Don't necessarily rely on them fully, but start with them. Microsoft Office, if you have the Adobe program, they have built-in tools. Use accessibility checklist if your organization has them, or use tools like Chartability, which is a set of heuristics where you can check it. I've linked it there. And some resources. Not going to go through all of these, but I've got them sectioned off by understanding, assessing, and other resources. So for example, I love the colors in this presentation, but I had a last minute, oh my gosh, are these accessible colors? So I checked it. And as a result, I actually increased the size to make this large font to be okay, to make it accessible. All right. I'd love for you to stay in touch with me. I'm on LinkedIn. I still think of it as Twitter, and you can also email me. And if you need any time to think about questions, or as you put your questions in the Q&A, here are some key takeaways. Accessibility is like super focused, user-centered design. Know your audience. Incorporate accessibility into the MVP and your workflow. Screen readers can't read color. Check for accessibility, and really just try your best. You eat an elephant one bite at a time. Thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate you carving out time to spend with me. All right, we've got questions.
Yes, thank you so much, Emily. And I'll start just going through. We had quite a, like I said, lively Q&A section. Somebody had a question that came direct from their product manager asking, how do you go about reconciling accessibility needs with variations in multicolor visuals needed to effectively convey insights for business users? Are there any visualizations you would say are not accessibility friendly or compliant?
Well, so I think part of it depends on how the visualization is developed and what about that accessibility need conflicts with the business requirement. They can work together. So I think I would need more, I'm sorry to say this, but I think I would need more information to really be able to give you an answer to really satisfy that. And there are so many visualizations out there. The one thing that I would love to see more of are people sharing good accessibility visualizations, because it's hard to have really good examples, or for people to be courageous enough to go, this was a really bad example, and I've learned, and here's a remake of it.
Great. Thank you, Emily. And another question here from Susan. What are the most impactful accessibility elements for dashboard when it comes to neurodivergent people and those with cognitive differences?
Yeah, so I think part of it is having a clean dashboard, meaning space, using highlight. Don't have having a lot of space, having space so that you don't have text that is a ton of text altogether. Using that highlight palette, and really thinking about helping somebody focus on what is most important. And then if you're not sure, then go back to the user and say, this is what I have as version 0, version 1, whatever. What changes would you like to see? And the one thing I'll add there is that sometimes that requires psychological safety in the work environment. And so my personal opinion, I believe that that's a responsibility everyone has to say, it's okay, no judgment. We all have different perspectives. How do you best learn? How do you best consume? That's what I want to know. All right.
Awesome. And I know AI is a big topic. What are your thoughts on generative AI assistant's ability to summarize dashboards to overcome the accessibility challenges within those dashboards?
I think that it is going to be a really great step innovation for accessibility. One of my co-lead of the accessibility user group that we run for the Tableau user groups, he built a tool in ChatGPT. If you had premium access, you can link to it or you could access it. And it's a version 1. It's not fully complete, but it helps check the accessibility. So from that side, I think that's a great first step. And as the technology and as the data is out there more and more, it's going to get even better. When it comes to summarizing dashboards, I think it can be really helpful. I think what you have to do is take a look at the results that it's providing. And as somebody with domain knowledge, as a subject matter expert, is that consistent with what you'd like to share? Is it formatted in the way you'd like to share it? I mean, one of the challenges I see with ChatGPT, for example, is that it's very wordy and it comes out like a lot of text. And I know for me, bullet point that stuff, or for some of my users, they need to see it concise, bullet pointed. And so you might want to make changes to it. So again, great first step, but don't rely solely on it right now. Make changes as necessary.
Great, thank you. I think we have time for just one more question. What are some of the differences in accessibility for dashboards versus general accessibility rules? Like, for example, contrast rules when dealing with graphs and charts. Can you speak specifically to those?
Yeah, so the rules that I talked about with the 3.5 to 1 ratio, that comes from WCAG. And so, and what you'll see in Chartability is that it references the standards. And then if there's any community practices, which I really didn't touch on too much today, but all of those standards that I talked about for the contrast ratios, those all come from WCAG. So we take the ones that apply to the visualizations, and if they don't apply, then we haven't applied them. But everything I talked about today is either a best practice or part of the WCAG guidelines.